Good afternoon, all the participants. My name is Tariq Siddiqui, and I represent the marketing and product function in Collins Learning. Today, I welcome you to this webinar on the topic, Help Students Get a Better Grade in IGCSE English L1, from a series of webinars conducted by Dr. Elaine Higgleton on ELT topics. As a brief introduction of Dr. Elaine Higgleton. Dr. Higgleton has nearly 30 years of experience in dictionary, reference, and educational publishing, and has held various roles during her career. She has experience of teaching English as a foreign language at secondary school level and first-year university level, having taught at the prestigious Sorbonne in Paris. In the course of her career in publishing, she has held roles working as a lexicographer on a range of dictionaries, including dictionaries, grammar and other reference materials for ELT, and has managed the publishing of Collins dictionaries, including the Scrabble list and dictionaries for India and China. Since 2012, she has been international publisher for Collins Learning, and in this capacity helped with the initial setup of Collins India and continues to lead the development of this strategy in publishing for the highly successful educational list for the Caribbean, and plays a major role in key projects in the Middle East also. She also leads on publishing for Cambridge Assessment International Education. During the course of her career, she has given presentations on different aspects of English at several conferences, including AITFL in the UK, Next TESOL, the British Council Teacher Educational Conference in Hyderabad, and NELTA in Nepal, and has run thousands and hundreds of workshops for teachers focusing on ELT teaching skills and helping teachers to develop their own English language. Over to you, Dr. Higgleton. Thank you and happy learning to all the participants.
Thank you very much, Tariq. I hope everyone is well. It's lovely to be with you this afternoon, so thank you for joining me. Now, this is a huge subject, so we're only going to be looking at one or two things today that can really help our students get a better grade in their IGCSE English exams. And we're going to be thinking about this in quite a holistic way. It's not just students preparing for the exams that let's hope will happen next year or the year after. It's activities that we can be helping students develop now while they're at primary school that will stand them in very good stead for future learning. I'd like to start with a small warm-up exercise. Could you all take a minute and read this poem and answer the question, who fell asleep in class? And type in your answers in the chat box, and the Collins India people will kindly read them out to me. Who fell asleep in class?
So I'm looking for the answers in chat. The poet.
The poet? Okay. Any other answers? Who is the poet?
Ken Nesbitt.
Yes. Who is the Ken Nesbitt wrote the poem. The narrator fell asleep in class. Who is the narrator?
Ms. Nagma Sheikh says the learner. Narrator is I. Ahana says it's I. Someone says the teacher, the pupil.
Okay, great. We're gonna come back to this in a minute because this is partly what we're going to be looking at today. The answer is the teacher. The narrator of the poem is the teacher, and it's the teacher who fell asleep in class today. So what we're thinking about today are skills like how do we read for inference, because this is a big topic in the IGCSE exam. And this little poem illustrates that example. Nowhere does it say, I, the teacher, fell asleep. It's inferred by the wording used in the poem and by the author's choice of vocabulary. That's one of the things we're going to be looking at today. So what we're going to be thinking about is what do we need to do to help our students get better marks? How do we help our learners move on from becoming dependent on us as teachers to becoming independent learners in charge of their own learning and learning in an active way? And as I said at the beginning, these are skills we need to be developing from day one in primary school, from grade 1 all the way up. if you don't leave it until ages 14 or 15, it's really too late. And this is why it matters. I've had a look at the examiner's reports and at the results for IGCSE English. And while a lot of students do pretty well and get an A star or an A or a B, 40% of students actually don't do very well in this exam. And of course, when we have parents paying hard-earned money to send children to school, they're looking for good marks. They're looking for an A or an A star. If a student wants to go and study in the US or the UK or Australia or Singapore, the more A's and A stars they have in their results, the better. So what is it that helps a student go from a grade C to a B or an A or an A star? And these are the things the examiners have highlighted. That candidates need to read for inference. They need to read for inferential meaning, the meaning that is implied and that is implicit in the passage and that isn't stated in an explicit way. Less good responses came about when readers failed to pick up on the clues that authors had left in their passages. In the reading exam, as you know, there is a mark for the writing of the answers. Those students who scored more highly had more effective and interesting vocabulary. They were less likely to copy passages, vocabulary, phrases, words from the text. They could use their own interesting vocabulary. Students lost marks through avoidable mistakes, silly errors that they could have avoided if they'd taken a little bit more care with spelling and punctuation and grammar. And then in the writing exam, it was pointed out again that to get a good mark, to get that elusive A or A star in the writing exam, you need to have good, varied vocabulary, well-chosen vocabulary, and have complex vocabulary that you can use accurately. And again, the examiners talked about the importance of not making any errors, very few technical errors. These are some of the errors that examiners found: basic punctuation and grammar errors, sentences without a verb, incorrect use of participles, omission of definite and indefinite articles, persistent use of commas, misspelling of basic words, wrongly selected homophones, uncertain use of preposition. So look at that final remark by the examiner. Sometimes a band 5, and in a written exam, a top mark is a band 8. Sometimes only a band 5 could be awarded because silly errors were serious because they impeded communication. So these are the 3 summaries of the key language points. To get that A or A star, students need to read with real attention to the details of the language, to understand the author's inference and the writer's purpose, to consider the connotations and associations implicit in the language, and to make sure they understand the clues that the author is giving them through his or her choice of vocabulary. Vocabulary, students need not only to understand for the reading exam, but to have very strong mastery of vocabulary skills and a wide range of vocabulary for both the writing part of the reading exam and the separate writing exam. And then accuracy. It's really important students pay a lot of attention to accuracy. We only have an hour this morning, so we're going to be starting about how we read for inference, and how we read for inference and vocabulary go hand in hand. What the research tells us is that too often we teach students what to think, not how to think or how to learn. So we might teach our students vocabulary, we might give them a list of words and say, go away and learn this list of words. That's giving them a list of words to memorize. That isn't teaching them how to use the words, and it isn't giving our students the tools they need to take those words and bring them into their own vocabulary of English. Now, this how to think and how to learn, this is metacognition. This is what we call metacognitive skills. It's the processes that a student can use when they can plan their own learning, monitor and evaluate their own progress, and make practical changes to improve their learning behaviours that in turn have an impact on their learning performance. So, for example, I do not learn visually. I learn by making associations. So now I know that I learn by making associations. I can give myself little tricks and tips that help me remember things. So I was in Indonesia last year, and I challenged teachers to teach me the first 5 numbers in Bahasa Indonesia. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the only reason I remember that is because I've given myself a little phrase. Saturday, dual teachers emphasized learning in action. And that is my little mnemonic that helps me remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Got it. That's how I learn. So I can harness that understanding to improve my learning. And I will never forget 1 to 5 in Bahasa Indonesia now, because I've got my trick. So that's what it's about. What is it for each of the individual students? How do they learn? And how can we harness that understanding to improve learning so that we've got better learning for the exam and can do better? So when we start to teach how to infer, we are looking for clues. We're looking for clues in the writing. Now, we all infer every day. How do we know if our friend is in a good mood or not? How might we work that out? So what else might we put in the empty blue circles? We can tell if our friend is in a good mood from what he or she says. What are the other clues to how they're feeling? Type in some answers for me using the chat box. Are we getting any answers, Shrikant?
Someone says body language. Miss
Body
Nagma
language?
says expressions.
Yep. Body language expressions is a good one. What else?
Miss Rashmi Patel says facial expressions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Miss Nagma Sheikh again, emotions on the face and gestures.
Yeah. Emotion, gestures, body language. What
the
else?
way he or she is dressed.
The way he or she is dressed might be a clue. Absolutely. If it's somebody who's usually smart and they're looking scruffy or untidy, that can be a clue. What else?
Ahana says voice.
Voice.
Someone
tone.
says smile on Facebook.
Yeah. Tone, intonation. We know
yes.
a lot from how someone is feeling from their intonation. That's great. I think we've got most of it. So
and
body language,
on Facebook,
facial expressions.
On Facebook, we have something, they say behavior.
Yep, absolutely. So how someone behaves, whether they're smiley, whether they look happy, what their tone of voice is like. Do they sound angry? Are they using friendly and pleasant intonation? Has their voice got an upward tone? What are they wearing? Are they looking happy? How are they dressed? We can tell from a lot. We can tell a lot. We can infer a lot about how somebody is feeling from all of these things. We don't need them to tell us, I'm feeling really happy today, or I'm in a bad mood. We can work that out from clues. And it's the same with reading, but we have to really look at the vocabulary. So coming back to this poem, inferring is working out what the meaning is based on the clues in the text. What is the clue? What is the words? What are the words in here that allow us to work out that it is the teacher who fell asleep? Can anybody tell me which the words are that give us the clue there, that are the clue that we need to work on and that we need to expand and extract?
Waiting for answers. The last verse.
The last verse? Is it all of the last verse?
Guess.
This
close my eyes. So Tariq says it is close my eyes.
No, this is the key phrase. My students woke me as they headed out the door. This is the phrase that allows us to infer that it is the teacher who fell asleep. The use of my students. If we have a group of people in a room and we have 20 of them who are students and we have me, the only person we would normally have in a classroom other than the students is the teacher. So it is the use of the phrase my students that tells us that the narrator of the poem is not a student, therefore the narrator is the teacher, and therefore it is the teacher who fell asleep in class today. So we really have to look with huge attention to detail at the vocabulary that authors choose to use, because this is where they're packing in clues. J.K. Rowling is a very clever writer, as you all know, and she packs clues into the names of her characters. So who is the Professor, I think it's Professor Snape, isn't it, who is the one we're not sure about. And we know we're not sure about him from the name he's given. She's packing clues in. Authors do this all the time. Look at this little bit from Matilda. Take a minute to read this through. How many children in the class already know the 2 times table? This is an easy question because the answer is given explicitly in the text by Roald Dahl. He gives us the answer to that one explicitly. What's the answer to that? How many students already know the 2 times table?
Okay, I'm still getting answers about Harry Potter. So 2 times table, the answer here is grade 1.
How many children know the 2 times table? How many children in the class?
Okay, one.
And that is easy. That is easy for us because Roald Dahl explicitly says she was the only one. But if we want to work out which class Miss Honey teaches, and it is grade 1, I know you all know that. That's not the point. We're not here to show how much we know. What are the clues? What are the words in the passage that allow us to work out that it is grade 1? What are the words in the passage that allow us to work out, to infer that it must be grade 1?
Tiny girl is what Miss Rashmi Patil says.
No, it's not tiny girl.
Anjali Jain says it is the 3rd line. Miss Nagma Sheikh says beginning of 11 years. First day for each one of you is what Miss Vinayak says.
Absolutely. Now is the very first day of school for each one of you. It is the beginning of 11 long years. The key thing is the very first day of school. That means that the children haven't been to school before. You can see we can use a grid like this to help students learn how to do this kind of reading. They identify the phrase, they explain what it means. Now is the very first day of school, means they haven't been to school before. And then they extrapolate from that this must be their very first formal year in school, which in India is grade 1. So they identify the words, they talk about what they mean, they paraphrase, they draw out, they work out why it's the key phrase, what it means, what bit of the meaning is significant, and therefore how they know from that key phrase. Let's have a look at another one. You have to dig really deeply into the vocabulary. We'll look at another one in a minute, but look at this. This is looking at the author's use of the word groaned. Now, the author here uses groan as particular effect. He's not saying moaned. He's not saying complained. He's saying groaned because he wants us to understand that Sasha is responding as if she was in physical pain. So she's putting it on to make a point, therefore to upset her mother. So reading for inference is all about really looking in detail at individual vocabulary items and at phrases. How would we summarize Miss Honey's reaction to Matilda? To Matilda's recitation of the 2 times table. How would you describe that in your own words? What are the key words that we need to look at that Roald Dahl has written? And how would we paraphrase those? What do they really tell us? What do they really mean? Have a look at this little passage. Which bit is the key word that that Roald Dahl puts in to tell us how Miss Honey is reacting to Matilda?
Listening spellbound.
Listening slightly spellbound. Absolutely. Those are the key words. If we look at this, we've got wonderful right in the beginning, but that's a bit misleading because that is before Matilda starts to spell. So the key words that Roald Dahl has given us is listening slightly spellbound. And what does spellbound mean? How would we paraphrase that? If we had to write that in our own words, what would we say?
Someone says mesmerized, impressed. That's what Miss Nagma Sheikh says.
Yeah. Spellbound is under a spell, but you wouldn't get very many marks in your exam if you wrote under a spell. If the examiner's question was, how does Miss Honey react to Matilda's recitation of the 2 times table, and you wrote under a spell, that would not be a very good mark because you're not using new vocabulary, you're using what's already in the text. The examiner is looking for words like entranced, amazed, astounded, disbelieving. When we're spellbound, we cannot believe what we are hearing. So a good answer would be that Miss Honey was mesmerized by Matilda's recitation, that she couldn't believe what she was hearing. So we start with the words the author gives us. We draw them out, we paraphrase, we write out synonyms, close synonyms, we work out what it really means, and that leads us to our answer. Let's have a look at another example. This example is from a grade 4 book, and you can be doing this with children at all ages. Wasso is the baby. Why did Wasso start to cry? We need to identify the key phrase and then infer from that why the baby started to cry. Take a minute to have a look at this little patch of text, this little piece of text.
Ms. Nagma Sheikh has given an answer.
I think Miss Nagma Sheikh was at my workshop in Mumbai.
Exactly, I think. There's no response.
No response from anybody else?
Yes, Ms. Nagma Sheikh says yes, she was at your workshop.
Yeah, nice to be with you again, Nagma.
So I'm not giving out.
No, please keep Nagma's answer because I'm sure she's got it. I'm
Yes.
interested to know if other teachers have identified the phrase.
Yes, so I'm keeping Nagma's answer, but on Facebook, the answers that we get is because the chief shouted at her. That's the first answer. Second one is from Priyanka Das, which reads afraid and surprised.
The key phrase is Wasso looked at the man who was shouting at her.
So someone has given shouting.
That's right. That's the key phrase. Wasso looked at the man who was shouting at her. Now, how would we draw that out? What would we infer from that? She's looked at this man who's shouting at her. What does that mean? Why is that the clue to why she started to cry? What does that mean? If he's shouting at her, what does he look like?
Shouting makes a baby upset is what we get from. Menacing is what Miss Nagma Sheikh says.
Yeah. Okay.
Frightening, menacing. Then Ahana says she was afraid.
Absolutely.
And
she starts to cry because she's afraid. She's frightened. She's frightened because the man is shouting at her. And shouting can make babies cry. And the chief, if he's shouting, looks and sounds angry. So that's why she's frightened. So when the examiner says, why did the baby start to cry? You identify the key phrase. Well, Wasso looked at the man who was shouting at her. He's shouting at her. She doesn't like shouting. Babies cry when they get shouted at. The chief looks angry and sounds angry. So she started to cry because she's frightened. But it doesn't say that explicitly in the text. We need to encourage and help our students identify the phrases, work out what they mean, and then answer the question based on the information in the language in the text. I've got another couple of examples. Read this passage. We'll do one more example from this passage. This is from Collins IGCSE, so this is at a much higher level than the previous example. Read it first, and then I'll give you a question. So my question is, what is Sasha like? From what the author has told us, what is Sasha like? If we had to write a short paragraph in an exam answering the question, what is Sasha like? What would we say? What are the key phrases that we would use? What do they mean?
So
what are the key phrases?
we've got some words from Miss Nagma Sheikh, and I shall read them out. Stubborn, and someone else says obstinate.
Okay.
And Miss
What
Nagma
it's
Sheikh
doing-
again says adamant.
Okay, what you're doing is you're interpreting what's there. What we need to help our students do is, first of all, to work out the bit of text that needs to be interpreted. We can all immediately go to the answer because we are all high-level learners of English. We're all very experienced. We've all read thousands and thousands of books in our lives. So we can do inferential reading naturally. But this is about teaching students how to do it. So what are the key phrases? If a student says, I don't know what Sasha's like from this text because the author doesn't say, how do we help them get to stubborn? What are the words that allow us to get to stubborn to describe Sasha? That's what I want you to do. What are the key phrases?
So someone from Facebook says strong-will you can't have. Someone else says Miss Mallika Sen says she likes elaborate cakes. And can't have everything your way.
Okay, so she likes elaborate cakes is what I'm looking for. Can't have everything your own way is a further extrapolation.
Obstinate and adamant is another answer from Facebook.
Yeah, you're going too far. That's not what I want you to do. Don't look at the last column. Look at the first column that's labeled phrase. These are the key phrases that the author has put in the text that we can use to work out what Sasha is like. Sasha's eyes, which had already moved on to. That's an important phrase because it means she is no longer looking at her mum. She is no longer listening to her mum. So from that we can say she's rude to her mum. She doesn't respect her mum's advice. She doesn't want to listen to her mum. She is obstinate and stubborn. It's the phrase, Sasha's eyes, which had already moved on, that allows us to get to words like obstinate and stubborn and rude. So this is what we need to teach students to do. It's that middle bit. It's identifying the words and phrases, working out what they mean, and then arriving at an answer that makes sense based on what the author has actually written. As I say, we all do it naturally because our skills are very high level. These are the skills that our students need to explicitly develop. So the next phrase is she's then looking at the photographs of the elaborate cakes. So from the elaborate cakes, we can extrapolate that perhaps she's more interested in party food. Is she greedy? Is she selfish? Because elaborate cakes are going to be a lot more expensive than anything that her mum might be able to make her. So we can extrapolate from the fact she's looking at elaborate cakes that she's a bit greedy, that she's probably a bit selfish and a bit self-centered. And then if we look at the phrase from the computer months ago, that tells us she's been thinking about and planning her party for a very long time. It's very important to her. So that also tells us that not only is she stubborn, obstinate, self-centered, greedy, but that she's also very motivated by her social status, by being the popular girl in class, and by having a party that is really gonna make everybody feel very envious and jealous of her. So do you see what I'm doing here? We're looking in a lot of detail at the author's words. We're working out, teasing out what those words are really telling us to arrive at an answer to the question, what is Sasha like? So if we were going to write an answer, we would say, Sasha's very obstinate and stubborn. She's very self-centered. She doesn't listen to her mum's advice. She's possibly quite a greedy girl. She's quite motivated by food, and she's very motivated by her social status. It's very important to her to be the most popular girl in the class. And that is the answer that will get an A star. And that's how we help students do it. Look at the language, work out what it means, and then extrapolate the answer. If you have any questions, please do type them in, because I'm going to leave 10 minutes for questions at the end. I do appreciate that this is quite a hard strategy, but that's why we want to start it with students in grades 3, grades 4, with simple passages like Wasu and Wasu the Brave Baby, because we can really help students start to infer meaning from the words that children's authors write on the page, because they're really clever. They're not just writing for the sake of it. So it's really important that we look closely at language. So we need to look both at the individual words and then at the phrases that they're used in. So what does the word methodically tell us? What does it tell us about how Theodore is, what Theodore's like? What does it tell us about his personality? I'll give you a minute to read this through. What does methodically tell us? What does enthusiasm tell us? And what does inexhaustible tell us? What do those words mean? We have to paraphrase them in our own words. Let's just do that bit first. What answers?
So we've been getting some answers. Someone says in a planned manner with great thought.
In a planned manner, yeah.
With a great thought. Well planned, organized manner. Goes in particular format, systematic, meticulous. These are the answers from Facebook.
That's great.
In a process, step, energetic. So getting a lot of.
Okay, great. Great. So we need to look both at the individual vocabulary. Are we getting any answers for inexhaustible, Shrikant?
Yes, I'm looking for the answers. Inexhaustible.
So
never ending is an answer that I've got.
Yeah.
But nothing towards exhaustible. Yes.
Okay, that's okay. So we look at the individual vocabulary, but then we need to look at the whole of the phrase.
I think we are getting something now.
Okay, what are we getting now?
We are getting infinite, brimming.
Infinite, brimming.
Then as if a resource which is hard to be depleted.
Mm-hmm.
And
not going to be depleted. Great.
Indefectible.
Indefatigable.
Yes, indefectible.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay.
And I think inexhaustible, immortal.
Immortal. Immortal's not quite right here, but we won't worry too much about that at the moment.
Indomitable spirit.
Okay, that's great. I think we've got enough. So you've all got the idea. So now, how would we write a description of Theodore using our own words based on the phrases that have been underlined? What do these phrases tell us about Theodore that we would put into our own description of him? Give me some sentences that you might write about Theodore based on these phrases that have been underlined. Because if this is the kind of thing
I think Ms. Nagma Sheikh is giving a lot of answers on
Okay.
Zoom. So she writes, ruminates, thoughtful, pensive, thinks before he acts. Someone writes, Theodore is a balanced person. He doesn't jump to conclusions.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. What else?
And I'm looking for answers on Facebook. Okay, we're getting the answers on Facebook, courtesy the lag. Always enthusiastic about learning something new is one answer. Then Ms. Aarti says a slow eater. Then methodical and pre-planned. Then the next answer on Facebook is he was a particular man, hence chewed his food 32 times.
Okay. So those are interesting answers, but to really help us get our students get that A star or that A, things like he doesn't jump to conclusions are what the examiner's going to be looking for, because we've not repeated any of the words that are that the author has used, but we've extrapolated from the words that he is both very considered but also interested. So from that we can extrapolate that he doesn't jump to conclusions. And this is what I came up with. He's a very deliberate person. He thinks carefully about everything that he does. And in outward appearances, he seems to be rather formal and reserved. But this is just a facade. Behind the reserved exterior is someone who's interested in and excited by new ideas. Eyes kindling with enthusiasm. Kindling is what we talk about fires. So when a fire is burning brightly, we've got sparkle and we've got that crack, and that's what he's like. He might look very reserved on the outside, but his eyes show us that he is really interested in and excited by new ideas. His ideas glow like a warm fire. And he knows so much about things that he's a walking library or encyclopedia. So what the examiners are looking for us to do is to take slowly and methodically and come to the conclusion that he's very deliberate. He may be quite reserved, that he's very thoughtful and considered. The examiner wants us to take eyes kindling with enthusiasm, to be able to make a difference between how he looks on the outside and maybe how he's feeling on the inside. So he might look reserved, but inside he may be buzzing with energy and excitement. And the examiners want us to use the idea that his knowledge seemed inexhaustible to give a sense of indefatigable, never-ending knowledge and learning. He's a man of real learning. So we really need to dig into the vocabulary and the phrases to come up with the answers the examiners are looking for. So let's come on to how we can help students develop some of these vocabulary skills. So examiners, remember, are looking for varied, powerful and appropriate vocabulary, both in terms of what they understand in their reading passages that we've just looked at, but also in terms of how they write. So how they write their answers in the reading comprehension papers and how they write in the creative writing papers. And we can use a range of instances to help students actively learn and master vocabulary. There has been some research into vocabulary skills, and it has been estimated that students need to encounter and use a word at least 7 times for it to become an active part of their own vocabulary. So it's not enough just to give students word lists and say, learn this list of words before the exam. That's not enough. They've got to not only learn the words, but use the words actively in their own vocabulary and think about the words. So one of the reasons that English is such a difficult language is that we don't have any direct synonyms, but we have hundreds and thousands of near synonyms which have their own connotations. So when we're thinking about introducing young students and young learners and young children to vocabulary skills, we might give them some near synonyms. So we might give them big, enormous, gigantic, huge, and large. How would you put those into order of importance? Which is the biggest and which is the smallest? Let's see if we can do that. Which one would come first?
Looking for answers. Gigantic is the first.
No, gigantic is not the first. Which is the smallest? Which is the least big? Which one comes first in terms of being the smallest or the most neutral, that has no connotations?
Least. Okay, they're asking. Okay, fine. Waiting for the answers. Okay, big, large.
Big and large, absolutely. Big and large come first.
Then
they
huge.
Are neutral in meaning. Then huge, yeah.
So this is order: big, large, huge, enormous, and gigantic. Yes.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right.
From Facebook.
Big, that's right. Big and large are fairly neutral. They basically just mean fairly sizable. Huge is slightly more emphatic. If something is huge, you're emphasizing the size more. And then enormous is further emphasized. And if it's gigantic, then it's probably bigger than you ever imagined anything ever could be. And what about shine, sparkle, and glitter? What are the differences in connotation between these words? This is a difference in connotation. With big, enormous, gigantic, huge, large, it's difference in what they're saying about the size of the thing. What is the difference between shine, sparkle, and glitter?
So glitter, sparkle, shine is answer. Someone says shine, glitter, and sparkle.
What's the difference between shine, sparkle, and glitter?
Okay.
We say they all mean the same, but actually they're not all exactly the same. They are different. What is the difference between shine, sparkle, and glitter?
Miss Nagma Sheikh says intensity.
Yeah.
Miss
Partly
Ambika.
Intensity. What else?
Effect. Miss Ambika Vinayak says effect.
Effect. Absolutely. They have different effects. If something is shining, it is glowing with a steady light. If something is sparkling, it's twinkling. The lights are moving around and moving, and there's movement there. If something is glittering, there is also a sense of movement, but you get a glitter effect from very small pieces of metal. So if it's glittering, it's a more metallic effect than sparkle. So they're all slightly different in their connotation, and they would all have a different impact and a different effect in a piece of writing. So we need to help our students develop these kinds of skills. We may well give them a list of words that all mean big, or that all mean small, or that all mean shine, but we need to help them understand that they have different connotations, because this is the level that we need to be reading at for our inference in our IGCSE exams. So remember Sasha groaned? The author deliberately chose groan because it means, oh, that's why the author chose it, for that connotation. Roald Dahl deliberately chose spellbound to describe Miss Honey. He wanted that, can't believe what's going on here feeling. He wanted to express that. So we might often give students exercises like this to do. They've written something about what they did at the weekend, and they've used the word far too much. So here they've used nice. So we might want to give them some activities around nice. Now, it's really important that with students, we give them the right kinds of resources. Anybody can go online and go to an online thesaurus and look up nice, and it will give you hundreds of alternative words, but it isn't necessarily going to give what the student, what the child, what the learner needs, which is the different connotations of the words. Because the word we might use for nice to describe people might be different to the word we use to describe food. So here's a page from a school-focused thesaurus where we're looking at nice. So when we give children work to do on vocabulary skills, we need to give it in a structured way, not just a list. Get them to look at their dictionary, if their dictionary also includes synonyms and antonyms. Get them to look at the different entries for the different words, to look at the different examples, so they start to see the difference in how the different words are used. So for nice, if we're describing someone's appearance, we could use attractive. And we see an attractive young lady, a beautiful baby boy, a very cute girl, a dishy brother, etc., etc. If we want to look at nice, describing food, we're given words like appetizing. So we see that appetizing is used with smell. We've got delectable with raspberries. We've got delicious with meal, luscious, peaches, mouth-watering, tasty. So students see that while nice can be used for people and food, these synonyms of nice that are used for people and food are very different. They have different connotations. They're used in different contexts. So we need to help students build up vocabulary skills at this kind of level. And we can do this all the way through schooling. It doesn't just have to be with little children. It doesn't just have to be with students who are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, even older. We can be doing it at all levels. So with young children, we might just give them big, large, and enormous. Help them understand that enormous has a different connotation to big. We might, with children in grade 4, give them nice and say attractive, beautiful, cute, etc., etc. for appearance, appetizing, tasty, delicious for food. And we can put this vocabulary into charts. So this is me putting nice into some charts. So we've got a person's appearance, attractive, beautiful, good looking, personality, friendly, kind, likable, weather, fine, beautiful, occasion, delightful, enjoyable, agreeable, fantastic, food, delicious, tasty, clothing, etc., etc. We can get children to put things into charts to help them remember, and we make it more of an active learning, get them to write their own sentence with each of these words in, not copy from the dictionary, but write their own so that they're actively using the vocabulary. We can put things into spider charts. Doesn't have to be a boring old chart. It can be a spider chart where they're putting the words in, writing their own sentences, so that they're starting to own some of these alternative words and some of this vocabulary, and starting to understand some of the connotations that authors play on and rely on for inferential reading. We can use fishbone diagrams. This one doesn't really mean very much to me, just because of the way I learn. I would probably put something in a spider chart like that. Let me show you. I'm working at home, as we all are at the moment, and look at my worksheet. See all those spider charts? That's how I learn. That's how I remember. Students need to do what works for them. So we can take core words like nice, teach our students about the alternative words, get our students to own that learning by putting them into a chart or a picture or a diagram of some kind for themselves, and then write their own sentences using their dictionary to really understand how the words are used, so that they're actively learning vocabulary rather than just learning a list of synonyms that you've given them or that they found online. So we can give them examples, exercises like this, where they maybe have to copy out a text like this and use more interesting, more complex vocabulary for the bits in red. So what would we say here? Remember, this is what the examiners are looking for. Interesting vocabulary. This is from our IGCSE practice book. What could we say instead of very bad? What could we say instead of thrown up? What could we say instead of got into our ears, made a loud noise, and very hard? What are our alternatives? What would our more interesting alternatives be? Examiners are looking for complex and sophisticated vocabulary. How do we make this piece of writing more sophisticated? By changing some of these very basic vocabulary items.
So I think we've got answers. We've been getting answers. For very bad, it could be terrible.
Yeah.
Violent storm is the
What's
next
violent
answer.
storm for?
The wind made a loud noise. So I think it's for that.
That would have to be completely rewritten then.
Yes.
You couldn't say the wind made about a violent storm. You're then rewriting that whole sentence completely.
Yes.
How would we say made a loud noise in a more interesting way? That's what I'm looking for.
Thundered.
What else?
Thundered,
yeah.
That's my answer, by the way.
Okay.
Very bad, tough. Thrown up,
yeah.
Flung,
yeah.
Thrown up, blown,
yeah.
Abhinandan, if you could say what you would want buffeted to be, where you want buffeted to be placed. So road made a loud noise. I think someone has given road.
Road, yeah. So I think Abhinandan means buffeted, for the sand was thrown up. The sand was buffeted around in the air.
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah.
And very bad, overpowering.
Overpowering for very hard.
And get into penetrated.
Penetrated, absolutely, yes. These are some of the things I came up with. So rather than terrible for very bad, because terrible is still fairly neutral, we could use something stronger like atrocious, abysmal, dreadful, or horrendous. And of those four, atrocious is probably the strongest. And then for thrown up, we can have hurled up. Somebody suggested blown up, and that's fine, but blown up doesn't have the same strength of being buffeted. Buffeted is quite good because it means being blown around. But if we're really talking about tossed up or hurled up, those are perhaps a bit stronger. Penetrated is a great one for getting into ears. Entered is neutral. Pierced. What's wrong with pierced as a synonym here? Why does pierced not work? What's the connotation for pierce?
Connotation for pierced, looking for answers.
Because if you look up online, it will tell you pierced is a synonym for penetrated, but it's not quite.
So the answers here is from Miss Ambika Vinayak. It is striking. Someone gives hurtful, Miss Nagma Sheikh. For pierced. Okay,
pierced is wrong because when you pierce something, you take something sharp to it and make a hole in it.
So
that's
on
not
Facebook,
really what's happening here. It's the sand is blowing into our ears and making them get stuck. So penetrated is better than pierce. Pierce has the wrong connotation here. And then for very hard, difficult is fairly neutral. Taxing, or you could say strenuous, or walking was arduous. And then made a loud noise, we've got tumultuous, deafening, thunderous, thundered, boomed, which I think lots of teachers said. So we need to give students exercises and activities like this and get them to think about what the options really are. Blown up is a fine alternative to thrown up, but it doesn't quite have the strength of hurled up or buffeted. Roared is okay as a synonym for made a loud noise. The wind roared. But what about thundering and booming and tumultuous? They're stronger. Terrible is a good synonym for very bad, but atrocious is much stronger in terms of its weight and its implication. So this is what we want students to start to really dig into, to understand for their own writing, and so that when an author writes, the wind was tumultuous, we understand what the author is saying by that. We're saying a lot more than very loud. And when an author says walking was really arduous, we understand that that is more than just difficult or tricky or tiring. It's really arduous. It's wearing us out completely. It's overwhelmingly tiring. So we want to be working at this kind of level with our students. And how am I doing for, let me just check the time. Okay, so we're going to have a look at another example here. So what words could we use in this gap? A person who does not have a lot of fat on their body. What words could we use in that gap?
Lean.
Lean.
Slender.
Slender.
Slim.
Slim.
Thin. Skeletal.
Thin.
Skeletal.
Skeletal.
Lanky from Facebook.
Lanky. Okay, great. So I think quite a lot of you must have been to this workshop. So what words would we put in here? You've given me some of them. Somebody who does not have a lot of fat on their body can be described as all of these words. But which ones would we use here? Would we say Deepika is pretty with a skeletal build and dark eyes? What would we say for Deepika?
Looking for answers. Ms. Geetana writes healthy. On Zoom, we have the answers as slim and slender.
Slim and slender. We're looking for ones with a positive connotation because we are being admiring about Deepika. We're saying she's pretty, she's got lovely dark eyes, so she is slim or slender. She's not skeletal or bony. She hasn't got a lot of flesh on her body in a way that we consider to be positive and pleasant and that we approve of. What about the next one? She looks really horrible, and what would we use here?
Bony.
Bony.
Skeletal.
Or skinny or skeletal, because we're not admiring here. This person is probably too thin, overly thin. Teenage boys often go through what kind of phase when they have a growth spurt? What word might we use there?
Lean phase. Someone has given skinny phase.
A lean phase, or
horrible and dangerous is what I'm getting from Facebook.
Sorry? We're talking about their bodies. We're not talking about their minds and their behaviors, just their bodies. You know, when a boy is about 12 and suddenly between the ages of 12 and 13 or 14, they do a stretch. We say in Scotland, take a stretch, and they go from being 4 foot high to being 6 foot high. Their bodies often don't keep track with that growth. What do we describe that? We use lean, and we also use lanky.
Yes.
Lanky is another very good phrase there. What about the next one? Pretty. Softly spoken and shy was their first choice for the part. What words would we use there? Again, we're looking for positive connotation words again. So those would be slim, slender. What about the next one? This is also positive. Slim, slender, svelte.
So we're getting answers.
Yeah.
Thinny. Thinny?
Sorry?
Okay, plump.
Yeah, we're not looking at words that describe us having more flesh on our body than we should. We're looking at words that describe being slim. So we wouldn't use plump because that is not a synonym for slim. That is slightly going the other way.
So
and what about
tall,
the last one? He's extremely tall and
tall and slender,
Tall and
lanky.
slender, lanky, absolutely. But you can see from this little exercise that we tend to use slender for women and lanky for men, but neither of them have really negative connotations. They're both quite positive. So this is a really interesting area. So again, we can put these words into a chart, which are positive, which are neutral, which are negative. Are there any specific points of usage to remember? So we would put slender in the positive chart, and we might say often used of women and girls. We would put lanky probably in the positive chart and say often used of men and boys. We might put bony in the negative and skinny and thin in the negative. Gangling and gangly is another word that we use. It's not really negative, it's not neutral, it's sort of positive, but we tend to use gangling about children when they go through the adolescence and their legs and arms get very long, but the rest of their body doesn't fill out. So we tend to use gangling in those kinds of situations with those kinds of connotations. So we really want students to be digging into what these words mean and how we would categorize them. So that they're really developing this understanding of the vocabulary of English. I'm going to have to skip this because we haven't really got time to go through this. So I want to run through why this is important. It obviously can lead directly into a better grade for the student if the student is able to work on strategies to improve their inferential reading and to improve their passive understanding of vocabulary and connotations of vocabulary, so they can really understand what authors are implying with their choice of vocabulary in writing, but also so that students have much greater vocabulary at their own command and can write with more complex vocabulary and score higher points. But it's also important because it relates to the Cambridge profile for students, that students should be reflective and develop their own ability to learn and to learn in an active way. So what we might ask students to do is to, before they do a written class, to think about, where might I go wrong? Do I have the vocabulary that I need for this written task? Do I need to go and make a list of some of the vocabulary items I think I'm going to want for this written task? What kinds of mistakes am I going to make? And then they do their task, and then they evaluate it, they reflect on it. Was looking at vocabulary before I started helpful? Did that help me? Let's imagine I've had to write a creative essay on the beauties of the mountains, the mountainside of India's wonderful mountainous region. I might go and look up some good words: glacier, ice, rivers, streams. What kinds of flora and fauna am I going to find? Pine trees, birds that are raptors, eagles, buzzards. You know, what am I going to find? Did researching that vocabulary beforehand help me write my passage, and therefore did I get a better mark? Was that helpful? What did I find easy? What worked for me? What do I do that makes it easier for me as a student to get my better marks? And the value of this is that Hattie has done some research, and if we can really get students using metacognitive skills, so understanding how they learn vocabulary and how they can learn to read to infer, we can get students actively owning this themselves. It has a huge impact. They become independent. It's an effective strategy for students from all backgrounds, even from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's got a very low cost because we, the teachers, teach them and they then own that learning. And it's got a strong evidence base that it leads to a better result. And to cut a very long story short, if we can get students starting to implement metacognitive skills, understand their own learning, and start to implement skills that help them personally, the result is a an improvement of 1 GCSE grade for each student. So even starting just in a small way with looking at vocabulary in primary school and how we start to build vocabulary skills in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3, eventually when it gets to that IGCSE exam, that could be what is holding the student back from getting the elusive A star or A. So it has an impact. It's impactful for students. So that's why it's so important that we teach students some of these basic and very practical metacognitive skills for the classroom. I'm going to stop there. Apologies for running over by 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions?
So, waiting for some questions.
Okay, these are some resources. The activelylearn.com is an interesting site about metacognition. And this is some of the John Hattie references if you're interested in some of the theory behind the impact of metacognition. But on that Actively Learn website, there's a lot of help with using metacognitive skills in all kinds of classrooms. But it's really just getting students to understand how they learn and then apply that knowledge to their own learning. And what we've looked at today is the strategy for teaching how to teach students to infer meaning and vocabulary.
So here we go. This is the first question, Elaine, from Ms. Divya Sone. And I had seen this question repeated on Facebook. The question is, where can we find such types of exercises online? If you could advise.
So if anybody is using Collins International Primary English and Collins Checkpoint English, there are the exercises that I did are from those books. But if you go to this Actively Learn website, you will also find more activities and ideas for activities. So if you're using somebody else's book or a Collins book, or you just want more ideas, you will find ideas at that website. But the activities I've done today with the grid to break down the inferential reading, that's all from Collins Checkpoint English and International Primary English. And the vocabulary exercises and activities are ones that I've developed. But that blog post is quite useful.
Okay, I think that's all. However, there are a lot of praises for you, Elaine, and I'm impelled to read some of them. So one is, it is really wonderful to connect online after the face-to-face workshops with you in Mumbai last year, Elaine. That's from Abhinandan.
Thank you, Abhinandan. That's nice. It's nice to know that you're there. It's so nice to know that in that audience in India, I've got faces that I would recognize in the crowd. It's lovely. You and Nagma, it's great.
Okay, there is another question from Mr. Pradeep Kumar. How can we get such activities online for students? I think that is a part of your answer.
I think this website is online and free and has a lot of very good stuff on it, so you can look there. And you can, of course, take the activities that I've done today and adapt them for your own purposes. If you have different reading passages, you can still use the grid and say, okay, what are the key words? What's the key words and phrases? How do we paraphrase that? How do we draw it out? What's it really telling us? And therefore, what's the answer?
And coming to the digital learning, someone is asking if we've got any app.
An app for digital learning for this?
Yes.
I know that Collins India have a home learning, a digital website, don't you?
Yes.
Freecant.
Yes, we do have the Collins Digital Home Learning website,
which is free for all. Yes. You have the Collins Home Learning digital website. Do you want to say what that website address is? I'm sorry, I've forgotten to include it here. Perhaps I can add it.
So in the Collins Digital Home Learning website, we've got about 6 subjects, which include from grammar and composition to listening and speaking activities. Yeah. And we also have a bit of math practice. We also have worksheets for dictionaries. And this website caters to students from K-12, K-10, yeah. I'm sorry. So we'll be happy while we send all of you mails. We'll also be very happy to share the details of the
Okay.
website with all of you,
Do you
with
want
the worksheet mails.
Do you want to read out the URL and I'll type it up here?
Yes. So I'll just give you the URL once. It is HTTPS. It's nothing but harpercollins.co.in/home learning.
harpercollins.co.in/home
learning. Yes. So we've been sending those links to all the registered participants who've actually registered with us for your session, Celine. And we've been doing that for the past two mails that we've been sending to all of them for their certificates. So I think everyone should be having an idea of the Collins Digital Home Learning
so
website.
It's that, yeah.
Yes.
So there's a lot of material on there.
Exactly. And any other questions? Thanks a bunch. I think there's a lot more appreciation than questions. So I think everyone has understood and thoroughly enjoyed what you've done.
Great. Thank you. It's been great. It's been good. I know it's hard. I know it's very, very hard, but it's all, for me, and I know it takes time for us as teachers in the classroom, but if we can help students from a very early age become more active learners, the benefit to them is enormous, and the benefit to us is significant, because if they're learning actively, they're gonna absorb and learn so much more, and it does eventually start to lessen the teacher workload. If a student can use a dictionary to correct their own spelling and grammar mistakes, and you don't have to correct them, that's saving you time correcting, and the student is actively learning about spelling and grammar by doing that. So I'm a real fan of getting students to understand how they learn and to take ownership for it, and giving them lots of strategies, different strategies that work for different students in different ways.
Exactly. And I think there is a question from Zoom. The question is by Ms. Rashmi Patil. Teaching to infer, can it really be taught, or it develops with practice or reading only?
I think some students will naturally do it because they have the kind of mind that is wired to be very sensitive to language and meaning. But it can be taught, as we've been looking at today, and for students who need to have it taught to them, the more they practice, the better. Well, the more anybody reads and practices, the better. But yes, it can be taught, and we should be teaching it. Yes, there will be students who'll do it naturally. You were all doing it naturally throughout the presentation. I had to keep saying, no, I don't want that bit of the answer. I want the bit before, the step before. But it can be taught, and it should be taught, because that's what examiners are looking for.
Yes, I think these are the questions that we have on both the platforms, and otherwise it is a lot of appreciation for you, Elaine. A lot of appreciation. So I'll just read one for you. Someone says, thank you so much, ma'am. Wonderful session. And okay, there is another question which I had missed. If you could take this one last question, Elaine.
Yeah, happy to.
Yes. Could you please suggest some ASL activities for classes 9 and 10? ASL means speaking and listening activities.
Okay. Some speaking and listening activities for grades 9 and 10. I would probably go to the BBC website and see what they have on the BBC website, because they have a lot of speaking and listening material at the moment, particularly with the lockdown here in the UK as well as in India. Companies like the BBC are making a lot of material available free online. So you could go and look at the BBC online website, and of course they have very good materials to listen to, particularly for speaking and listening, because they have all of their recorded materials as well. So I would suggest having a look at the BBC website to see what they have on there, because they have a lot that they're providing for home learning in the current COVID-19 lockdown crisis. I'd have a look there.
Okay, and one last question perhaps, if you would like to take, Elaine.
Yeah, I'm happy to, yes.
Okay, how to teach phrase learning in an easy way to the children in junior classes?
So you mean things like set phrases and idioms?
Exactly, phrases,
okay,
yes.
Set phrases and idioms. I think we need to, I'm a great believer in learning through discovery. So if you have idioms and phrases that you want children to learn, I would look for reading passages, or even write little reading passages for them to read and discover the phrases and the idioms for themselves first, and then to talk to them about what they think they mean, and then to explain what they mean, and then get the students, once they've got a bank of maybe idioms or phrases, to write something for you using those idioms and phrases in their own sentences. So I wouldn't start by teaching them. I wouldn't say, here's a list of phrases we're going to study today, or here's a list of idioms we're going to study today. I would give the students something to read or listen to or look at that allows them to discover that vocabulary, those phrases, and then teach them how to use them. So that's where I would follow. Because I don't think giving students lists of vocabulary, lists of words, lists of phrases is going to really help them. I think we need them to explore, understand, and then use.
So
I hope that helps.
Yes. I think that's all for this evening, Elaine. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Collins, we'd like to thank all the attendees for their continued support across all the 4 sessions that we'd had. And I think we are indebted to all of you for supporting all of us. So thank you so much, and wish you all have a great weekend.